What was interesting with the film was I didn't account for the moon. I hadn't thought about the moon cycle, and as the moon changes, you would see the shadow passing across the urns and you see the pattern of the leaves on the urns. It just hadn't even occurred to me that that would happen, that you would, see it passing over the urns. I'm Raewyn Atkinson, and I work in clay. I would call myself a clay artist. My mother, I was told she was dying, and I started thinking about urns and why we have urns. Why do we want to keep the ashes? I just started playing around in the studio with making these urns and putting the plants and thinking about the whole idea of the cyclic nature of life and death. I have a very pantheistic view that we just continue to cycle around, and that this will be a way to demonstrate that the urns degenerate but the plants grow. I wanted it to look very organised, pristine to start with, and you'll see that at the beginning there's nothing growing around it. Urns are all white and it's all very symmetrical, and then over time it gets very chaotic and urns break apart at different times and weeds grow, and so that was very deliberate, that it was very tight and organised to start with. I wanted a sort of contrast between that urn and the disintegration and the Nutukaka growing. For me, that was a way of bringing my passion for restoration and growing native plants and my practice together. When you talk about firing, it goes through a transformation. In some of my work, you'll see, I loved how the glaze runs and pulls, and it's like you've caught that moment. The film is there to record having to hold on to something or have something permanent when nothing's permanent. When you stop firing, the glaze is held, and it's just held there melting. You've recorded a moment in time with those urns disintegrating. It's almost like you are seeing something happening in the kiln, but you can't see what's happening in the kiln because you can't look in, or you can't see the whole process, but you could see the whole process in the raw clay disintegrating. I used clay from our section, our property, for the bases. What I'm doing here is dug the clay out of the bank, and I've made some fibre from harakeke, stripped the outside coating off the harakeke from the garden, and then that creates these long fibres, just holds the clay together. With clay you can kind of tear it off and chop it up, or you don't have to be exact. It can be so much. I think that's the other thing, is it's limitless in that the potential of it. I went to Antarctica in 2000. I'd been creating work in response to whaling in New Zealand. Going to Antarctica, that environment where you're very aware of your impact, just being there, and then everywhere you go, this is not your environment, and you have to be very careful not to disturb it. It's also the barometer of what's happening in the world. What we're seeing with climate change, the urgency has grown and the importance has grown. I'm becoming much more conscious of it, to a degree that I find I would prefer to be growing plants and working with restoration. I mean, I really am passionate about clay still, but I find that it has to be mediated by that. I've been concentrating on working solely with porcelain, and this was the first move back to using red clay, but I am moving more to that idea of working more with unfired, and that's what I really enjoyed also about this project. It didn't just combine my passion for growing native plants and restoration, but also not firing. When we fire, it's using fossil fuels. I'm very much more aware now of trying to be a bit more sustainable, and that reflects the times for me, that reflects what we need to think about very seriously. That has a big impact on how much I make now and what I make. The idea of doing more work with local materials is very important to me.